Hi, everyone. Welcome on the podcast Stories from War. And my guest today is an American living in Ukraine and who chose to stay in Ukraine when the war started. This is the famous Johnny FD. How are you doing, Johnny?
Hello, everybody. Pivit. Salut, bonjour, wherever you guys are listening from. It's really cool.
Wow, that's really impressive. How many languages do you speak?
I can say hello in all the languages probably, but that's it.
Okay, so Johnny, for any listener or viewers that do not know you yet, could you make a quick presentation?
Yeah, so now I'm probably most famous for having a big YouTube channel. I've had it actually for a long time, but it got popular actually during COVID when I was traveling around the world. And then it got popular again during Ukraine because I happened to be probably the only American YouTuber who was in Ukraine when it started and who actually came back and has been documenting daily life in Ukraine. I'm in Kyiv now. Last week I was in Kharkiv. So I've been showing all the places that I was living before the war happened.
Okay. So basically you were one of the first wave of digital nomad back in the days. So you started doing that. You were traveling around the world and you decided to settle in Ukraine. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I grew up in the US, as you mentioned, in San Francisco, went to school in LA. And honestly, I just wasn't very happy. I was very depressed. That got me into a bunch of, things that are a bit cringy-worthy. In retrospect, I was drinking a lot, I was partying a lot. Just, I wasn't, who I thought I should be. So I decided, let's leave this country, let's move to Thailand and start over. And I became a dive master, which is a scuba diving guide. Did that as well, Muay Thai. And I did that for about 10 years in Thailand. And then I got tired of it. I said, you know what, 10 years of living on islands, it's amazing, but I need to have a normal life again. I didn't want to move back to the US. So I chose Ukraine.
Okay. So directly from Thailand to Ukraine. That's quite the opposite. What made you choose Ukraine?
So for anyone who's seen kind of the nicer parts of Ukraine that hasn't, fortunately has survived the war, people are always surprised how nice it is, how good the restaurants are, how beautiful the bars are, and some of the architecture, not all of it, of course. But Ukraine had a lot to offer and was growing rapidly since when I first visited in 2016. And every year it would get 10 times better. More coffee shops were open, more restaurants were open. There was more tech, super fast Wi-Fi. It was just a really amazing place that I saw me investing my future in. And also during COVID, it was really hard to travel and go anywhere. And I wanted to get permanent residency somewhere. I wanted to feel safe and secure. Knowing I can go back to the place I've chosen as home while still not being in the US. I'm sure for a lot of people, moving to the US is a dream, but for me, I just had really bad experiences growing up there, and I didn't want to go back. And Ukraine had a relatively affordable and straightforward residency program. So I started that and I bought some property, and this was all starting around 2019, I had decided, but 2021, that's when everything kicked into gear. So I got to enjoy it for just about 1 year before the war started.
Okay. So after 10 years of living in Thailand, you were saying, okay, I need to settle. Ukraine is a good place to be. So let's go there. And you started investing. So you have apartments in different cities, if I'm correct.
Yeah. So this apartment I'm in now is the one I live in my home. That's in Kyiv. And I had a rental property in Kharkiv. Both of them are in the center, really good locations, something that I never would have been able to afford without having a 40-year mortgage back in the US, especially in the center of a cool city. So I knew it was a risk. I knew that was a small war on the east since 2014 when Russia first invaded. But to be honest, if you spoke to anybody in Kyiv or even Kharkiv, which is right almost on the Russian border, 25 miles from the Russian border, it didn't affect our lives at all. Nobody thought about it. It's the same as people in South Korea and Seoul don't worry about North Korea on a daily basis. They just don't even think about it.
Yes. Yeah. So basically you had zero idea or any glimpse of, maybe, something could happen. Because anybody I've talked to so far, told me it was impossible to think that a full-scale war could happen. Apart from Starsky, I think no one I've ever spoken told me, yeah, we were kind of expecting something to happen.
Yeah, so the only people that said 100% something's going to happen are either people who don't live in Ukraine, most likely people who have never been here. So people who watch the news or just really into war things that they saw on TV. A lot of them say, yeah, 100% I knew, but really, do they know? Who knows, right? And then you had the people from West Ukraine, from Lviv, that they never forgave Russia for all the atrocities that they've done throughout history. And it's one of those things where there was kind of a big divide where, for example, today, when somebody buys a Sony product or something made in Japan or something made in Germany, whether it's, a VW car or a Porsche, we're not thinking about the Nazi invasion, or we're not thinking about the Japanese, wars. It's something in the past that we thought, yes, a lot of bad things happened in the past, but we are now in a civilized time in 2021, 2022. There's why would somebody start a war? We have enough food in the world to feed everybody if it was properly allocated. There's enough wealth. There's enough of everything. There's no scarcity. So why would you start another war? And that's the mindset that 99% of people that I knew living in Kyiv, living in Kharkiv, had thought.
Yeah. And do you remember when the war started? Where were you and how did you learn, or how did you hear the news?
Oh, I had a party at my house right here in this room.
Okay.
The night before, and part of it was a little bit mocking, the war not happening, because every month or every week for the past 6 months before that, they said, okay, this is the day the war will start. This is the day the war will start. And every time we survived it, we started not making fun of it, but it kind of just cheekily celebrating, saying, okay, we made it through another, disaster date. And the thing is, if the reason why I didn't leave, and most people didn't leave before the war, even though there was this big buildup on the border and we knew there was a possibility, is our lives were here. For me, I invested most of my savings buying this apartment. I spent a whole year renovating it. This used to be some old, ugly Soviet flat that we took down everything. We redid the walls. We got all new furniture. And I invested 1 year of my life, but really it was 10 years of my life of me saving up to be able to afford this, for me to have this dream of coming here. So for me to leave because of what we thought was a showing off of the military strength. And that could last, who knows, it could last 1 month, or it can last 8 years of them, threatening some kind of invasion. I mean, in Taiwan recently, but also for the last, 30, 40 years, China sometimes flexes to show, we have our military airplanes that can come here. And imagine if everybody in Taiwan dropped everything and moved every time China flex their army. People would lose their homes, people would lose their jobs, people wouldn't be able to function. And that's how me, as well as 40 million other people here felt. I mean, sure, some people had left, but it was a very, very small amount. Out of the 44 million people here, I imagine it was less than 10%, maybe even far less than that, had even gone anywhere before the full scale invasion of February 24th. Out of the probably 30 or 40 people that I knew pretty well here in Kyiv, maybe 3 people left, and those are 3 people that I didn't really respect their opinion anyway. So I thought I will look around to see who's staying, and if the majority of them are staying, I'll stay as well.
All right. So you were trusting the judgment of your close friends and the one who maybe understand a little bit better, because I suppose as a foreigner in Ukraine, you might not have all the, the deep understanding of what's happening.
Yeah. So if I watched just US news or Western news, they said 100% this is happening. Get out. But that news had started 6 months prior.
Okay.
So I had left for a while. I went to visit my parents back in San Francisco, and they asked me to stay. And I said, I could stay, but for how long? What if this continues for another year? I don't want to just pause my life and be miserable here. And I looked around Ukraine, and very smart, very successful people were not just staying, they were investing money in building new office buildings, opening new restaurants. And I thought,
Okay.
if money is still flowing and people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars remodeling these restaurants and opening restaurants, they must know something that I don't know, that
Okay.
for sure the people watching Western news doesn't know. So in retrospect, we were wrong, but it doesn't mean that they magically knew something we didn't. Russia either did something that's very unthinkable, which I believe they did, very miscalculated, because with the information we had here, it would be stupid for Russia to attack, because we knew there was zero chance that they would be able to keep. And it turns out that Putin had, different information where he thought it would be an easy war where he can take it in 3 or 7 days.
Yeah. And how is your family back home in the US thinking about all of this?
They were very, very, very worried in the beginning. I mean, they had been asking me, for months before that to leave. And that's why I went to visit them, just to show that I was okay. And when the actual war started, I think if it was just me, I would have stayed. Actually, would have stayed. Maybe I would have moved to Lviv or something, but I think I would have stayed. But my mom was so worried, and I knew that even if nothing had happened to me, but just in the high chance that I lose internet connection for a few days, she would, not be able to sleep. She would panic. It would not be healthy for her or my father, who are both older now. And I thought, okay, like I have to leave. So on February 25th, exactly one day after the war started, I went to Europe. I went to Hungary. I went to Poland. I went to a few places, and there I attended anti-war protests. I visited different organizations to volunteer, to fundraise. And then I realized, what, I'm not doing enough. There, I felt helpless. So I thought, okay, I have to go back to Ukraine. Now that things are slightly more settled down and we know where the troops are, we know what the actual danger level is. And in April, February, March, April, end of April, I came back.
Okay, so you're now at your apartment. Because you're working remotely, I guess it doesn't affect much your work. And on top of that, you're doing a lot of actions to support local organizations. So it's through your videos, we can see everything that you're doing. But can you explain a little bit all the organization you support and what you do to help?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as my personal work, I used to still run a lot of my nomad businesses. I had a annual event called the Nomad Summit. I had all these like a marketing consultation, all these things. I stopped all of it when the war happened. I realized I don't have time or the desire to even think about optimizing someone's e-commerce store to help them make more money, because it just wasn't a priority anymore. I decided, okay, I still need some way to live, but I also want to use my time 100% towards something that can help Ukraine. So I decided I would just focus on YouTube. I don't earn a lot of money from YouTube, but it's enough to live here. And through the channel, I can show what's really happening in Ukraine. And I can highlight what others are doing and ask people, to donate to them directly.
Okay, and then when you fundraise through YouTube, then it goes to different organizations. But my understanding is you support different actions. So it might be directly, for example, you gave up your drone to the military, but also you support some shelters for animals. You do a lot of things. Tell us exactly what organization you follow.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where they are, but actually there's 2 Ukrainian cats that I'm fostering now. I tried to rescue one also from Kamaz-Podolsky, but he was so sick that it was better not to have him travel. And it just in general, I realized that my personality is I'm always interested in different things. So maybe I would be more useful in life if I had just focused on one thing, but it's also a good quality to let other people do that while I just come in for a few days or a week and just show what they're doing. So the biggest organization that I've raised for is called Razom for Ukraine. They are based in New York, and I chose them because they had a direct partnership possibility with YouTube where I can just tag my videos as a fundraiser, and then anybody who's living in the US, Canada, or select countries, they can just donate directly through a button. And
Okay.
that way I never have to worry about the money or touch it myself. And also
Okay.
YouTube doesn't charge any fees. They
Okay.
even cover the credit card fee. So for that one, I've raised now $38,000.
Yeah.
And for them, they are supplying humanitarian aid, and they're a very big organization. So I don't worry too much about like the logistics, because they can
Yeah.
handle it.
Okay. Yeah.
But then also, whenever there's something smaller, and people just need like direct money for either raising money. For example, there was a orphanage that took in a lot of kids from Mariupol and those affected areas, and they had no way to take them to the hospital or take them to different places. They just had like a lotta, like a small lotta.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard to transport so many kids.
Yeah.
So me and another YouTuber, or Zoob, as well as the Nomad Cruise kind of digital nomad group, we fundraised and we bought them a van. We bought them a big, I think it's a 9-passenger van. So now they can take the kids around. There was a choir, a Ukrainian choir, that wanted to put on a Christmas concert, but they didn't have enough money for really anything. They needed like lights, they needed costumes, and things like that. And I decided, what's Christmas without music? And they really wanted to highlight the Ukrainian original Carol of the Bells, Shedrick. So I thought, okay, I can show what they're doing, go to one of the rehearsals, and we raised enough money to basically put on the whole concert. So there was all these different little things, from helping with animals to helping with the military directly, whether it's raising for equipment, winter gear, or vehicles. We got a pickup truck for one of the anti tank defenders, where they would drive around in the back of a pickup truck with one of their I don't know what it's called, but the anti-truck anti-tank devices.
Okay.
And I figure, if I cannot be on the front line myself because I don't have the training and I don't have the language skills, and I honestly don't really have the ability to make a big difference on the front line, what I can do is help those people get what they need so they can do a better job. Because we forget that for every person on the front line, it usually takes about 5 or 6 people in the back to support them, to get them what they need, whether it's medical, whether it's the actual defense weapons itself, or even fighting Russian propaganda, making sure that other countries are supplying the aid and the defense that they need.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. So, okay, it's quite diverse, and whenever you see a need somewhere, basically, if you can step up, you're going to step up.
Yeah. And so far we've probably, it's hard to know, because I normally try to tell people to donate directly, because I really don't want to touch the money, because it's a hassle for me to, first off, to have to withdraw it or transfer it, because there's always fees involved. There's taxes. I'm so worried about my tax bill at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Because if someone sends me $100, I give away $100, but maybe I might end up paying tax on that. So actually, I'm putting money out in my own pocket. So in general, I tell people to donate directly. But sometimes people will do it through me just because it's easier, or it's hard for them to send money to somebody in Ukraine, because it's a different banking system. They don't have SWIFT. They don't have Venmo, or before, now some people have PayPal, but before there was no PayPal. So if I was to guess, add it all together, somehow my channel has raised over $100,000 to help people, which is insane. I never thought
that's
that
amazing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And how are your friends and the Ukrainian that you meet reacting about you, an American, staying?
I mean, it's usually a mixture of both. They're always very curious why I'm here, but they're always very grateful as well. They're always very thankful. If nothing else, it reminds them that they're not alone, that the world hasn't given up on them. And before the war, these cities, Kyiv and Kharkiv especially, were very international.
Yeah.
Kharkiv had a huge international student population. Kyiv was a big hub for business, for travel. And when they hear someone speaking English, or when they see some a different country, it's a little resemblance that they're not alone in this world.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're very grateful also that I'm showing what's happening in their lives to the Western audience, because it's very important for them to stay in the minds of people in the West, because without the Western support, especially militarily, it would be 1,000 times more difficult for Ukraine.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks to your videos, we can see how it's like the daily life in Ukraine and in Kyiv and Kharkiv. So obviously you had few damages in your apartment in Kharkiv, but like I was following all this story and I was like, oh my God, I was expecting, like the whole place completely burned down. But no, that was okay. I mean, you had a few issues, but it was not that bad in the end.
So for those who haven't watched the video yet, there was a new skylight installed complimentary by the Russian military in my apartment in Kharkiv. I've patched that hole since, and actually just today I decided to fill out the form using the electronic Dia app just to claim it. Not that I really care about the money I spent to fix it, but it's a way to document all the crimes that Russia has done to this country. And if they ever need me to testify in the future, or if we can somehow squeeze this money out of Russia to make sure they pay for it, then I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. And what are your plans now? Because it's been 1 year. Who knows how long it's going to be? I mean, everybody's saying it's going to take a long time still. Is there any long-term projection on your part, or it's more like now we think about the daily life and we will see?
Yeah, it's been hard. I mean, the rocket attacks on the infrastructure has made my life very difficult as someone who's working online and uploading, because half the day we don't have power or Wi-Fi. The last few days have actually been good, but it goes in cycles where things seem fine, and then there's another massive attack, and then things are bad again for a few weeks. So I never tried to get too hopeful. As far as safety wise, you never know, because you always hear, there's going to be another big offensive. You always hear, they're going to send more missiles, or they're going to do something crazier. So you can never really 100% just relax. I really was hoping this war would end by now, before 1 year. And I told myself originally that if it somehow lasts longer, then I'm going to cut my losses and just move somewhere. But, I feel even more invested now in Ukraine.
Yes.
I've met so many amazing people. I've realized that I can make a difference in kind of my own way that's unique to my skill set as a YouTuber that speaks English, that happens to be living here. And I realized that I definitely need a break. So I think sometime, I will take a little holiday, but then I will come back. I'm not going to sell my apartment. I'm not going to, sell my car or anything. I'll definitely take a little break, but I'll be back.
Okay. How do you manage mentally? Because I think mentally it must be really hard, the uncertainty of things. That's something I guess we all take for granted when we are living in a country that is not at war. Like the norm is you're safe, it's all right. But like an alert can start whenever. Do you still go to the shelters? And how does it affect your mental health? All this stress all the time, constantly for 1 year now?
What's ironic is the most I've stressed during this year was when I was in Greece.
No way.
Yeah. I remember I was sitting there on my balcony enjoying the sun, checking Twitter, checking YouTube, checking the news to see what's happening in Ukraine. And I was always stressed just thinking what is happening. And actually, when I got back, I stressed less, because when there's a air raid or there's a missile attack, I'll look around and I'll say, oh, my apartment's still okay. I'm alive. And usually I don't even check until the next day what was hit, because there's always that fog of war in the beginning where they actually don't want to announce exactly what was hit. So Russia doesn't know, and they can't adjust their aim. So normally you don't really know what's happening the first day anyways. And I used to stress for that 24 hours until we knew. But now I'm like, okay, like it's bad that it happens, but I know I'm okay, and my apartment is okay. So let's not think about it until we think about it.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, because I've been interviewing a lot of people here, refugees that have fled Ukraine and that are in south of France. And it's actually quite interesting, because even if you're safe, the war still happens to you. And in some ways, it's actually sometimes it's a different stress. I cannot say it's more stressful or less stressful, but it's a stress as well, because there you go, there's a cat. Hello.
Yeah, one of the two that I'm fostering now. Yeah.
So the fact that you don't know what's happening, you're not there, and you have your loved ones most of the time, or part of your family that is still over there, is actually quite stressful, and you're not here to help as well. So I would say it's a different kind of stress, but that's definitely like hard as well.
Yeah. 100%. And what's the other thing that isn't talked about enough is, I don't know what the word for it would be. Maybe gaslighting, maybe like cyber harassment, maybe, there needs to be some term, but imagine having your life uprooted, your maybe either your home physically destroyed, or just destroyed in a sense where you can't go back and have your life be normal again. Imagine, people that of losing their lives, and then some idiot says to you or writes to you online like, oh, this is some American fake war, or there's Russia's correct, or it's all because of bio labs or birds, or some BS, that propaganda. And imagine having to hear that. It's so stressful. I get a lot of it because I have a YouTube channel and I'm very public, and I show everything that's in my life. So people can, say a lot of things, but luckily I've gotten used to it. And I realized, either bots, or they were paid Russian propagandists, or they're just very misled people who, they're not somebody that you can explain in a logical way, what has happened, because any logical person will realize, regardless of everything else, Russia didn't need to attack Ukraine. If they had just flexed on the border and showed off and said, here's our demands, we want some kind of trade agreement with Ukraine, we want you to stop talking to NATO, we want you to stop doing this, I actually would have been okay with it, because I'm like, okay, Russia wants to flex, show their energy, show that they could do it. But the fact that they actually attacked, and then not just attacked, they did it in such a brutal way where they destroyed entire cities, they destroyed homes, they awarded soldiers who committed war crimes and rapes and innocent civilian murders. It's like you can't even justify it even a little bit. So anybody who tries to, they're either a complete idiot, or they are just a paid propagandist.
Yeah. Idiots, or, it's really easy to criticize everything when you're behind your computer and you're just angry at something and you need to direct your anger, right? So, okay, most of the time it speaks more about them than the reality of things. I think, as you said, if you have a logical mind, nothing can ever justify what's happening right now. The only way I can it's not even explaining it, but for me, it's simple. Putin and all those guys who are okay with it, they do not value life. Like, for them, life, zero value. Because how can you justify killing thousands and thousands of Ukrainians, Russians as well? Everybody's dying, right? If you value life, you don't do that. So for me, it's just like, I don't know if that's a cultural difference. Maybe you have an idea about that. Like, do Russians have, a problem with valuing life, or they just see, some sort of, pride into having an empire that is, greater than your own life, or if there is something like that?
It actually is a interesting discussion and kind of look into culture, which took me a long time to learn about while I've been here. In the beginning, the reason why I actually chose Ukraine and not Russia is actually because Ukrainian people were nicer. This is just before the war. It almost kind of reminded me of Canadians. They're just like, oh, very friendly, very honest. Versus in Russia, they were kind of like the cool, I don't know how to explain it, but it was a culture that actually, even in the beginning, like, I don't want to say I respect or looked up to, because I didn't want to live there, obviously, but when I would listen to their music or watch their movies, or see them flexing their lifestyle, I was like, oh, they're like, I can see it's like a very cool image. And I realize now that what it is Russians in general, they don't care about anyone who they perceive as below them, whether somebody is less educated or has less money, less power, less fame. And most of the people who have died on their side, all the conscripts, are minorities from the East, which Russia is like, yeah, let's get rid of them. If anything, it's better for us, because then it just leaves more true, Moscow Russians. Very few people from Moscow or St. Petersburg have been conscripted. So on that hand, for Putin and most Russians, they're like, okay, yeah, let these Bharat people from the East die, because we don't value them anyways. They also look at Ukrainians as little Russians that don't deserve to live either. So they're like, oh, forget them. So it is a very kind of nuanced, complicated, subject that I'm sure, other people could dive into better than I can. But the more I read about history, the more I speak to people about this, the more I understand how somebody can be this crazy to not value human life and continue the war. At this point, I think Russia and specifically Putin is so invested where if he stopped now, he's lost everything. So now he's basically gambling with other people's money, where he's just trying to double down and hoping that he gets some kind of win, where if he loses, he's anyways bankrupt, or he's anyways gonna lose his position. So from his point of view, he's acting rationally now, where he's just going crazy.
Yeah. For us, looking with our Western view, everything is just 100% crazy. Like there is not one thing where like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. No, there is nothing makes sense. I mean, the impact on Ukraine is just like horrible, because even if Western countries are providing weapons, and that's great, and I mean, we need to push all our government to keep doing that. Ukraine is paying the high price, the price of blood. So yeah.
And on that, so I think a lot of people don't understand that the reason why Western countries were so slow in 2022 to provide these weapons is they were hoping that Russia would just give up. They'll just take some kind of way out. And they've had a lot of situations where they could have taken a so-called win. Probably the easiest example would have been when they captured Azovstal. Putin could have paraded around the captured Azov defenders and said, look, we've captured all the Nazis, we've gotten rid of them. We've done what we wanted to do. We can celebrate. And they could have even negotiated with the West and said, okay, we'll stop the war now, but let's end the sanctions. Let's just move on. It would have worked, but the fact that they kept continuing. The West realized by 2023, Putin's not going to take a exit ramp. They're not going to give up. So the only way to push him out now is to actually defeat his military and to make sure that they can't just regroup and then attack again in 2 or 3 years. That's Ukraine's biggest fear, is that there will be some kind of ceasefire, some kind of agreement that won't benefit Ukraine, because Ukraine will still be suffering. But Russia is just going to take those years to buy more weapons from Iran or produce them, recruit more people, run more propaganda, and then 3 years later come back again when the US and NATO countries are tired of it and they said, again, let's let them do their own thing.
Yeah. I'm not so sure about the Western countries being tired at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, because now the stakes are way too high. I think everybody understands, no, Russia is never going to stop as long as Putin is in charge, and his government it's not just one man. But what I see very difficult is, how do you get rid of them? How do you get rid of Putin and the government and all these puppets and crazy people if the population doesn't raise? And I don't think Russians are going to do anything about it. So that's difficult.
Yeah, it is a tough situation. I do think that actually the people will eventually get tired of him and overthrow him. And it might not be the people itself, but it could be all the oligarchs that are losing money. And realizing that, okay, enough is enough. Let's get rid of him. And I think it will happen soon, because the thing about sanctions that people don't understand is it's a very slow but long-acting, let's call it a poison, where it doesn't kick in right away. Like it's scary in the beginning, but then they realize, oh, actually, it doesn't really change my life. Me not being able to buy a new iPhone, or me not being able to, go to IKEA. Like it's not changing my life because right now my iPhone, 12 or 13 is still good. But what they don't realize is that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, when they still can't get those items, their economy is going to be really terrible. So regardless of what happens, Russia's economy is going to suffer for the next 10 years, and also the reputation. Russians are going to be looked down on worldwide, first off, for backing this war and having a 71% approval rating for the war, and then secondly for not protesting earlier and not speaking up earlier. Because even if they do it eventually, which I hope they do, people are not going to forget that for the
I see.
days.
I think 10 years you're very optimistic. One of my biggest fear is the generational trauma that is being created right now. Like I cannot go around the fact that if you're a kid in Ukraine right now, you lose some relative, maybe you lose your home. How can you not have a lot of hatred against Russia? And like hatred between people is never good. So it's how do Ukrainian feel about that? Like in your circle of friends,
everybody hates Russia now, and everybody hates Russians now. I will preface it by saying that before February 24th, 2022, before the full-scale invasion, you can't say everybody, there's always like 1%, but the vast majority of Ukrainians like Russian people, they like Russian culture, they like Russia. As an American, we always exaggerate our words, so I would say 100% of Ukrainians loved Russians.
Okay.
But like what that really means is the vast majority, had respect and liked. Not maybe to all Russian people, but in general, they liked Russian people. They liked Russian culture. They listened to Russian music. They like Russian movies. There was no problem. There was never a problem with the language. Pretty much everybody in Kyiv that I met on a day-to-day basis was speaking Russian. Basically, 100% of people in Kharkiv and Odessa were speaking Russian. It was never a problem. Which is why when people ask me why I didn't learn Ukrainian earlier, is because in the cities I lived in, you just didn't even really hear it. But after this invasion, things have changed. Everything has changed in Ukraine, and it's all Russia's fault. If they didn't invade and they didn't actually attack, none of this would have happened. So now, yes, people hate Russians, and for good reasons.
Rightfully so, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody who would be invaded by someone would be like, no, now we are going to reject everything coming from
you. And here's a tip. If you are one of the very few, which is literally less than 0.1% of Russians who actually are speaking out against the war, who actually are actively against it, show it. Wear a bracelet or something with the Ukrainian flag, like a t-shirt, just that little thing just to show it. Because it's easy to assume that you're the 99% that either supports the war or is so selfish that you just want to stay apolitical or avoid the news in hopes that it doesn't affect your life. While the longer they do that, the longer this war goes on and the more people suffer.
Yeah, but this inertia that is going on in Russia, well, where do I get the news from, right? From the media. So I don't know what the reality is in Russia and but it seems that the vast majority, they still support what's happening. So that's tricky. And do you have a lot of Ukrainian friends that have families or relatives that are in Russia, and how does that go?
Yeah, I would say maybe at least half of the Ukrainians I know, they have at least one family member or friend in Russia, and every one of them, like I would say pretty much 100%, have had the same story where they had a conversation with them in the beginning of the war, and they would try to explain what is happening, and the Russian relative would say, yeah, but it's your fault, or no, this is just propaganda. Nobody in Mariupol is dying, Russia isn't bombing bombing, places. And they would basically gaslight their Ukrainian relatives and saying that either it's their own fault that they're being invaded, or that they're lying and there's really no war happening. And the Ukrainian would say like, oh, like
Yeah.
I'm calling you like, or I'm talking to you as like your, your nephew or your aunt or your sister. Like,
Yeah.
just listen to me. Like, please listen to me. And 100% of them have stopped communicating since.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a sad fact because I had a lot of friends who are Russian, either living in Russia or just a Russian citizens. And before the war, we would talk, at least on social media, or we would see each other at like nomad events, things like that. Not a single one of them has ever messaged me saying, "Hey, I know you live in Ukraine. I know you have property there. Like, how are you?" Or, "I'm sorry for what our president is doing." Like, nothing, like not a single word. And I know that a lot of them are either just putting their head down, thinking, "Let's let this let this war pass me and not affect my life." But by them not speaking up, especially when they're in a safe country, when they're in the US or when they're in Germany, like, do something, say something.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. You do have few YouTubers that are Russian and that are speaking up, but it doesn't feel like it's a majority.
Yeah, because think about it. If 1% of the Russian population, which is 144 million, had actually stood up, and here, let's say, guys, pick a date. I don't care what it is. The 24th of next month. If 1% of all of you get together and protest on the same day, or if 10% of people in just Moscow protest, that's over 1 million people. And Russia, Putin cannot stop 1 million people. Reason why the protesters have been jailed or beaten or silenced is because there's never been more than 1,000 of them. There's never been a really big amount where it's easy to control a small mob. And for those, Russians who are like, yeah, but you don't understand, our government's different. I'm like, look at the protesters in Iran.
Yeah. What about that?
They stood up, Look at Maidan in 2014 when the Ukrainians stood up against, their president for not following their wishes. A lot of people lost their lives. A lot of people got arrested, but they did what was right. And the fact that Russians aren't willing to do that, it's made every Ukrainian person I know first lose complete respect for them.
Yeah.
And also hate them.
So going back in your daily lives, you record basically your daily life in Ukraine. From what I've seen, I mean, apart from what you have showed in Kharkiv when you see a lot of damage, but in Kyiv, it feels like it's some sort of a normal type of life where cafes are still open, you go and do your jiu-jitsu lessons, and you go around places, and the abnormal thing is, of course, the news and then the air siren that you can hear from time to time, and then maybe you go to the bomb shelter or not. So can you tell us if there is anything else, like is just your normal daily life and you just add the sirens and that's it, you get along with it?
So it changes all the time, month to month, really, because it depends on how much immediate danger there is, where, if something got bombed very close to us or the city center recently, or a lot of people died, then maybe for the next couple of weeks, we will go to the shelter.
Yeah.
But then, I remember it was very annoying for some time because every time the sirens would go off, which could be, 2-3 times a day, we would have to drop everything we were doing. We would have to leave our shopping cart at the grocery store and go outside and wait outside for 2 hours in the cold for, or go, or give up on our grocery shopping. It was bad for everyone. It was bad for business, it's bad for economy, it's bad for our lives. So then after some time, people realized, okay, you know what, forget it. Like, let's just, like, it's your choice if you want to go to shelter or not. And most businesses have chosen to stay open, except for McDonald's. Ironically, they forced customers and their employees to go to the shelter every time there's a siren. People say it's because they're so afraid of bad news headlines. Saying that.
Okay, maybe. I didn't see it that way, but maybe,
yeah. So they're one of the few businesses that actually enforce it. And actually just happened to me the other day. I had just ordered my McDonald's and the sirens go off, and I was like, oh my God. So I'm standing in front of the McDonald's anyways, eating takeaway in the cold, but it doesn't affect our lives in the way where it stops our life, but definitely people have less time now because things are more difficult to do, especially with the power outages as well. Where before, when you do laundry, you just do it when you want to do it. Now you have to plan, when will I have electricity for 2 hours or 4 hours so I can do it without my cycle, cutting off halfway between. When can I actually get 8 hours of work in? When can I actually, have my meetings? When can I do this? When can I do that? And when are places open? So out of the friends that I have that are still in Kyiv, I see them much, much, much less than before. When I used to see them a few times a week and just spontaneously, I can just call them and say, hey, we're going to have dinner, we're going to do this. Now we need to plan and say, okay, next Sunday at 2:30, I'm having a party at my house, like, please come. And then even then, for planning for 1 week, something might happen where at 2:15, there was an air raid, and then the metro stops working because, there was a strike or something. And then they can't get here because there's no GPS signal and taxis, there's no internet for some time, and you can't even order a taxi. So things just get really, really frustrating. But what Russia doesn't realize is that the more that they mess with our daily lives, the more we hate them and the longer people are willing to fight. They're never going to give up. I will guarantee you that Ukrainians would rather have no electricity, no water, no, heat, than live under Russian rule, or even give Russia anything, give them an inch even, because now Ukrainians hate Russia so much that they would rather suffer for the next 20 years than to give up to Russia.
Yeah. It makes sense. And how is it going with the heating? Because you're in t-shirt in Ukraine, where it's probably very cold, and I'm cold in south of France, where it's really, really warm. So how come?
So outside, it's probably close to zero. My apartment specifically has always been very hot because I have really good insulation. I have all double pane windows. And the thing about heating in Ukraine is it's central from the city. And they run hot water through each building from the center all the way out to the suburbs. If you live far from the center, the water gets colder by the time it gets there.
Really?
Yeah. Or there's just somehow there's just and those buildings normally have less insulation, cheaper, older windows. So those apartments are cold, even though they have heat. But because I live so close in the center and I have good insulation, this is an old pre-Soviet building built by the Tsars. So I have these giant, super thick brick walls. And when it's warm inside, it stays warm. So I have this problem where my apartment is actually a little bit too hot, but I can't adjust it because the water just runs through. And if I close it, that means the people in my building above me don't get heat. So I just have to kind of just not suffer through it, but it's a weird consequence. I would rather be a little bit colder, but there's no adjustments.
So you are the only place in Ukraine that is suffering from heat in the heart of winter.
Yeah. And a funny thing is, my heat actually turned off for 3 days, and I didn't notice.
I
realized it was getting a slightly colder. I was like, oh, is the window open or something? And then I touched the radiators and they were cold. And then I realized it was because of a massive strike that they turned it off. But in general, I'm very fortunate that I have a good renovation and I have a good apartment, and it just stays warm.
Okay. Yeah. Well, lucky you somehow. I cannot imagine the cold, the minus temperature all the time. And I don't know how you deal with it. So we were living in Indonesia and we came back in November, and already the winter in France is such a shock for us. And you did Thailand directly to Ukraine. And that must be an adjustment.
Even hotter, actually had a pit stop in Sri Lanka for 1 year after Thailand.
Wow. Okay.
I got stuck there during COVID and it was even hotter there. So yeah, it was a very big shock. I'm still not very used to it, but at the same time, in Ukraine, especially in the center, we are going from a warm apartment into either a taxi or a metro or a restaurant that is, and you're not spending that much time outside. So it's cold, but for only a very short period of time. I will have to say that my life is completely different than the average Ukrainian, especially somebody who lives either far outside of the city center or in, an affected area. Their lives are completely different. Ironically, the people who live in nicer buildings, so like brand new apartments, they actually suffer more because those high rises are completely dependent on electricity. So when there is no power, their elevators don't work. So if you live on the 22nd floor with a nice view, which a lot of my friends did, you have to walk up 22 flights of stairs or be trapped in the elevator.
Okay.
Their water needs to be electronically pumped past, I think, 7 or 8 floors. So they have no water during blackouts. Their heat also needs to be pumped, or their electric radiators for newer buildings. So they have no heat. So it's ironic that people who lived in these really luxury sky rises, they are basically suffering more than somebody like me who's kind of in the middle in an old building, but in a nice old building. And obviously the people who, live in these old, badly insulated, Soviet Khrushchevka panel buildings with, thin windows and bad radiators, they suffer more because they're cold and it's, like maybe, it's not like a nice setup. But then you have the people who are even poorer than them living on the countryside. They are warmer because they have wood burning stoves. They have, like this village life where they have, pickled food. So like no elevators, so they don't worry either.
Yeah, they do not rely so much on electricity for the daily life, and that's helping. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm really happy that you have this channel and that you're going to have on a very wide variety of guests, because the one kind of big, weird kind of dichotomy is whenever someone sees life of what's happening in Ukraine through one lens, it doesn't show what is actually happening, on a big scale, because this is a big country with a lot of people and a very wide variety of lives. So, what's happening in my life isn't what's happening in my neighbor's life, or definitely not in someone who lives in a different city's life.
Yeah, definitely. There is one guy, I hope he's going to say yes. He's an American, but living in Ukraine for a long time. He's got a family and everything. He's going to the front line to play music to cheer up the troops. And that's his life now. That's the only thing he does. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's just absolutely crazy. And I want to show that. I want to show as many life trajectories as I can. And what does it mean to have a war? What does it mean for us? Because when you are a Western person and you live your just daily life, you do not realize there's a war, you see the news, but what is it exactly? So yeah.
War is complicated. War is fucked. War is bad.
But yes, that's for sure. Yeah. Everything is bad. War is bad.
But, at the same time, I have realized that even though it is a potentially global conflict, because if Ukraine fell easily, I would guarantee you that it would not end with Ukraine. They would have taken Moldova next. 100%. There was like zero chance they would not have just said, oh, you know what, Ukraine was easy, let's also take Moldova. And then China would have looked and said, oh, NATO and the US is not responding. Okay, let's take Taiwan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the world we live in now. Yeah.
So, it's and then who knows who would have been next? South Korea might have been invaded by North Korea. Iran might have decided, okay, let's take our neighbors as well. It would have become a much bigger conflict if Ukraine didn't stand. And this is why it's so important for Ukraine to stand. And I will say this, that before someone actually lives through a war, and I hope that not a single person listening to this ever has to experience it yourself, but until you've actually lived and suffered through a war and lost something, you have no idea how you would respond. You have zero idea how you would react. And you can think about it all you want, and you can say, well, if it came to my country, I would do this.
Yeah.
You have zero clue. Mike Tyson said it the best. They said everybody has a game plan until they get punched in the face. And I will guarantee you that whatever game plan you had, when Mike Tyson punches you in the face, it goes out the window.
For sure. That's a fighter in you speaking here. I like that. Listen to your history teacher tells you about World War II and all these things that happened in the past and it's far away. And I remember, you asked, at least me as a student, I always ask myself, what would I do? What would I do? Everybody wants to, I would be a resistant. I would do this. I would do that. Some glorified action to save your country. Now I know that I have no idea. Maybe I would just run away to save my family. Maybe I would fight. Maybe I have no idea. You just don't know. You just don't know. And I hope no one has to know. Unfortunately, it's not the case for you guys, but yeah.
Yeah, dommage.
So on another note, how did you met Starsky and Brandon?
Everybody's kind of connected here that speaks English. There's not that many of us in Ukraine, to be
Okay.
honest. I think Starsky, actually, I had watched him from the beginning of the war. I actually didn't realize it was the same guy. I kind of had forgotten that I had been watching his channel. So he came back into the picture later. Brandon came in the picture because in the beginning, I was helping. I raised quite a bit of money through GoFundMe, and I was giving it to any kind of initiative in Ukraine that I thought I can see was doing good things. But at some point, I ran out of places to give money, and I had some cash left, and I said, I want to give this to someone who's actually doing something on the front line, but I don't want to just give it to the military because it wasn't really going to make that big of a difference. I want to make an immediate difference. So I looked around to see who was serving on the front lines that needed something. And when I found out that Brandon's battalion, or medical battalion, was evacuating people from the front line, but they didn't have helmets, I realized, oh my God, somebody please buy these guys some helmets,
Yeah.
So I messaged him and I said, hey, how much do you need? What do you need? And he was being very modest about it. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to send him a bigger amount, and I'm sure he could figure out what to do with it. And from that, he realized how important social media is, and how not only can he help his own unit, but help out others as well. That's what encouraged him to start a YouTube channel and start posting. And that's how he somehow got contact with Operator Starsky. And one day they were having sushi in Kiev and invited me along. Luckily, it wasn't for someone's funeral. He just wanted sushi. And we met, and Starsky, as he is, did a background check on me before, meeting, make sure I wasn't some KGB agent or something, and he's like, oh, Johnny's doing really cool things in Ukraine. When he was in his 20s, he was picking up girls in the bar and doing a bunch of stupid things. But, now he's 40, he's a really good guy. All that to pick up stuff in the past can be forgiven. He's on the right side. And then he came on my channel. I did an interview with him walking around some damaged techniques near St. Sophia. It was a really beautiful video, and we became friends as well. So I think everybody kind of just ends up connecting somehow.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, Johnny, what are you gonna do when Ukraine wins this awful war?
I have a nice bottle of Moet and Chandon champagne in my drawer that I'm waiting for this war to finish. Okay,
so that's going to be your celebration. Are you going to have friends over, or is it going to be a solo celebration?
It's going to be a great party. I'm going to have everyone I know that's in Ukraine already come over. It is actually going to be, I think it's going to be a 1 week of a lot of great partying, and then it's going to be a lot of rebuilding, a lot of reflecting. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah. And what are your plans, long-term plans, meaning what are you going to do after the war? So you mentioned rebuilding, and do you have any idea or you will see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just turned 41 this year. I realized that it's time for me to settle down, get married. I want to have kids. I want to adopt my own actual cats and not just foster them. I want to have some dogs. And I want to buy a little dacha, a little piece of land somewhere, grow some vegetables, and have a calm, normal life. I've done a lot of crazy things in the past. I had a wild life living near Hollywood. Then the Muay Thai boxing career.
Yeah.
There's been so many phases of my life that I've changed a lot.
Yeah.
War 100% changes you. The person I was on February 23rd, 2021, 2022 is not like he is 10 years ago. Like things have changed so much. I even look different. When you look at a picture of Zelensky from 1 year ago,
yeah,
he's aged 10 years. And I looked at a photo because I got temporary residency about like 1 year before the war. So I had a photo, they had to take a passport photo. And then I had to take another 1 year later when I got permanent residency in Ukraine. And I looked at the photos. I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? He's like 10 years and 10 kilos more.
Yeah. Well, for sure, it changes you. Do you think, I guess you're basically facing your own mortality pretty much every day. And do you think that makes you realize the real value of things in your life and what's important 100%. For you?
Like 1000%. And I don't take things so personally anymore because I realize what's really important. One of the things that I was escaping in the West that I never liked is how people create so many problems when maybe life is too easy. And Ukraine people have real problems. So people don't get mad at little things. People don't get mad at things that, could be worked out in some other way. And people don't get so outraged here. Even when someone's has had a real suffering, they're still more rational somehow than somebody in the West who might have just been offended by something someone said. So it's really made me look at life differently, look at people differently. I definitely become actually more introverted as well. I don't mind having these long conversations and explaining things on a podcast because I know a lot of people can benefit and hear from it. But whenever people ask me one-on-one about what's happening, I don't have the energy to explain to every person what's happening in Ukraine or what daily life is like. And sometimes I feel bad because even like my sister, I don't want to explain to her something that she can read somewhere else. This is why I make videos. This is why I'm happy to do these interviews because I think it is important. And and then this is something that everybody can take in consideration. Like if you meet a Ukrainian refugee somewhere, they don't want to tell their story over and over, it's it's hard. It's been a long year, I would say. It's been a long year. And I hope it's the last one because I don't know how many more of these I can do. And I have it easy compared to most Ukrainians. I'm the first one to admit that. My life in Ukraine is so much easier than most people. I have savings, I have income still. I have a US passport so I can leave. I have options. If I wanted to, I can pack up everything here and I can move anywhere in the world and I can start over and actually have a pretty good life. I speak English as my first language. I can have a normal, good life again. And for a lot of Ukrainians, they don't have that option, So that's why I try to be their voice. I try to show what's happening. I try to, do what I can. I'm definitely not perfect. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, but overall I know that I'm doing what's right for Ukraine and I know I'm doing my best. And I think that's all I can do is I can try to do my best.
Yeah. Well, for me, looking at what you're doing, I'm like, oh my God, this is just absolutely amazing. I always feel that I'm not doing enough, that I'm safe here in south of France, having a nice life. And so, I guess at every level, you have some guilt of something. And I'm sure even Brandon would say, oh, I'm not doing enough. So yeah, I guess it's just we do our best, we do what we can with our own constraint. And for me, the main message I say to people, because it's also hard to know what to do, but at least do not turn away from Ukraine. keep looking at the news and what's happening over there. Because
Yeah.
the worst thing that can happen is people just forget about Ukraine.
Yeah, or stop caring. So podcasts like yours are very important. If you guys are listening to this or watching it, you should subscribe to the channel and share it, really, because these voices are very important, and I think these stories are very important to share. So I really, think that this could be, this is everybody's fight, and if you don't have a lot of money to donate or help, it's okay. You can help in other ways. You can help by fighting Russian propaganda or disinformation. You can help by hosting somebody in your house. You can help by even just commenting and just saying that you care.
Yeah. I think time is the most valuable resource, and if you cannot do anything, which might happen, you might be a student and you don't have the resources. Well, you have time. Just keep clicking. It helps. And if you have more, try to do something in organization, because you can do a lot remotely. I'm involved into some French organization, and we're doing a lot. And yeah, just do what you can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a really nice conversation. Enchanté.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Is there any last word you want to say to the audience?
I think everyone knows Slava Ukraine.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.